Do you play enchanters but you're not sure what enchanter to pick in certain games? Well, you're in the right place. In this video, we will dive into each enchanter and discuss their main strengths and weaknesses in champ selects and what would be the best ADCs to synergize well with them. This video will cover Janna, Sona, Lulu, Karma, Nami, Soraka, Morgana, Milio, Renata, and Senna. Please let me know what you think in the comments, whether you agree or disagree, or any advice that you think I may have missed out. Now let's dive right into what enchanter should you pick in champ selects. Janna. Janna is a unique and very popular enchanter who acts as the ultimate hybrid character. She has amazing engage and disengage potential, as well as insane peeling power and huge damage values when you choose to build damage. There are a few important points to think about when deciding whether to pick Janna in champ selects. Number 1. Enemy engage abilities to interrupt. Janna's Q can be used to interrupt many abilities in the game. Some of these abilities can be crucial for teamfight engages such as Zack's Jump, Nunu Snowball, and Rail Leap. You can look to counterpick into these champs after they have locked in. Janna's R can also be used to interrupt these abilities. Number 2. Game-winning abilities to counter. Some examples of these are Katarina Ultimate, Diana Ultimate, Neela Ultimate, and Samira Ultimate. Janna is the perfect counterpick as she can interrupt most of these abilities with her Q or knock them away with her R before her allies are killed. Number 3. Lane opponents. Janna's toughest matchups are champions that have more sustain than her, such as Senna, Sona, and Nami. This is because Janna doesn't have any base healing abilities and will not be able to sustain herself or her ADC as much as the opposing lane. Janna can also suffer from hard engaged characters such as Blitzcrank, Maokai, and Pantheon. And lastly, Janna can suffer against supports such as Brand and Zyra that have a higher damage output than her and can punish you for trying to poke. However, if you are a skillful Janna player, you can utilize her extra movement speed to dodge skill shots and hooks. Personally, I believe that Janna is the most blind pickable enchanter as she doesn't fare too badly against many supports, and even these matchups that I just stated can be offset by being an experienced Janna player. And with regards to enemy ADCs, there are some ADCs such as Neela and Samira that Janna can completely counter, as already discussed earlier. And finally, number 4, what ADC do you have? A crucial point to note is that Janna provides a considerable amount of attack damage when casting her shield on an ally, so ADCs that scale heavily with attack damage are best to play with her, such as Jhin, Draven, Miss Fortune, and Caitlyn. All of these champions can utilize the extra AD amazingly well. Janna also works well with ADCs that can benefit from her peel, which is mostly immobile ADCs with no means of escape. Again, Jhin and Miss Fortune are 2 good examples. Overall, Janna is a great enchanter to pick when there are dangerous ultimates and engages to interrupt on the enemy team, or you want to carry your solo queue game with her damage build. I wouldn't pick Janna in ranks if you aren't comfortable at dodging skill shots with her increased movement speed. Practice her first, and then she can lane against pretty much all champions. I have a few Janna guides that I will link in the description for you. Sona. Sona is the biggest scaler out of the enchanters. She isn't the strongest or most impactful support in the early game, and she can be seen as useless in certain matchups. It is imperative that you pick her in the right situation. Here are some important things I consider when deciding whether to lock in Sona. Number 1, the enemy support. Sona doesn't fare too well against hard engaged tanky supports such as Rel, Leona, Thresh, and Blitzcrank. Once they get on top of Sona, she almost has no chance of escaping. However, Sona usually fares well into other enchanters such as Karma, Lulu, and Milio, as she can stay relatively safe while she scales and has pretty good sustain into their poke damage with her W. Number 2, your ADC. Sona pairs very well with ADCs that also want to scale for the late game. The aim of this pairing is to safely farm up. Some examples of these champs are Vayne and Jinx. Sona can also synergize well with strong early game champs. She can secure them a kill at level 6 with her ultimate and provide decent poke damage in the early game that the enemies don't expect, and sustain her ADC with her W. Some examples of these champs are Lucian and Draven, but the ultimate synergy for Sona is Neela, as they pair together for great all-in potential at level 6, and Neela's passive increases both healing and shielding outputted by Sona. Number 3, your team comp and how do they scale. If your team doesn't have a front line, Sona is one of the worst picks to complete your comp as she is incredibly squishy. Furthermore, if your team has a few champions that thrive in the late game such as Vladimir, Kayle, and Smolder, then the aim of the team will be to reach the late game, which Sona is a perfect pick for. But on the flip side, if your team have a very snowbally team that thrives in the early game, Sona might not be the best pick if the aim is to end the game in 20 or so minutes. Overall, Sona is a great pick if you are able to scale to the late game and win late game team fights with her insane healing and shielding and low ultimate cooldown. I would advise not picking Sona if your team doesn't have any frontline and Sona cannot be protected. I also have a Sona guide if you would like to check it out. I'll leave the link in the description. Lulu. Lulu is the ultimate pocketing enchanter. Her aim is to keep her carry champs alive while also boosting their damage output and polymorphing dangerous enemies. Here are some of the game conditions I look for when I'm locking in Lulu. Number 1. What is my ADC? Lulu synergizes incredibly well with ADCs that scale and thrive with additional attack speed and movement speed. Some examples are Twitch, Vayne, and Kog'Maw. Lulu provides additional damage on her ADC's autos with her E and boosts their attack speed and movement speed with her W. She can also provide amazing peel with her knock-up on her R and her W polymorph. Lulu synergizes well with ADCs that have slowing effects such as Ashe. Lulu Q can be a great setup for Ashe to land easy autos, creating the perma slow effect. Ardent Sensor is also a perfect first item for Lulu when pocketing one of these ADCs. Number 2. Dangerous enemies. Are there any dangerous enemies that Lulu polymorph would be perfect for? Some examples of these enemies are Yone, Master Yi, and Kassadin. Champions that are capable of multi-killing can easily be dealt with by Lulu polymorph. This could easily win a late game teamfight. You should also be mindful of Lulu's AoE knock-up effects on her ultimate. This effect can sometimes be more effective at interrupting dangerous enemy abilities such as Katarina ult due to it being instant, whereas polymorph has a short delay upon casting and traveling to the enemy. So it is important to remember that Lulu has two ways of interrupting dangerous abilities at the same time with her W and her R. Overall, Lulu is an amazing pick to pocket your ADC and win the game by increasing their damage output and providing great peel for them. Rushing Ardent is very strong on Lulu. I would advise not picking Lulu if there are no good Ardent users on your team. Karma. Karma is the ultimate hybrid enchanter. She has a lot of early mid-game pressure with her mantra. Here are some of the things I look for when I pick Karma in Champ Select. Number 1. Dangerous enemy abilities that need to be interrupted. When deciding whether to pick Karma, you must be aware that she doesn't have a knock-up, stun, polymorph, or any other way of instantly interrupting an ability. This can be a problem if the enemy team has already locked in characters such as Katarina and Samira, and their ultimates need to be interrupted, otherwise your allies are likely to die. Some other examples are Nunu, Diana, and Miss Fortune ultimates. It may be better to pick an enchanter that has more CC. Number 2. Your ADC. I like to pair Karma with ADCs that want to play aggressively and aim to get an early lead. A good example is Ashe, as she aims to catch enemies out with her slowing effects in the early game, which can combine well with Karma's amazing early damage, her slow, and her root. Karma has really good poke potential with her mantra Q, which means she pairs well with poke champions such as Ezreal or Caitlyn. Jhin also has good synergy with Karma, as she can tag enemies from relatively far away with her mantra Q and Jhin can root them. However, there are multiple ways to play Karma support. Pairing with early game aggressors is good for a snowballing AP build, but you can also play for an Enchanter build. You can focus on your Mantra E group shields, which puts out considerable shielding once you have a couple items such as Moonstone and Staff of Flowing Water. This is more of a teamfight focus, meaning that you can have a safe, passive laning phase with a scaling ADC such as Jinx or Vayne if this is the build you want to run. Out of all the enchanters, Karma is the most versatile champ, as she can pair with almost any ADC purely because you can change her playstyle in each game depending on how you build and how you use your mantra. Number 3. Your team comp. Karma is the perfect answer if your team is lacking ability power. She is able to deal some insane damage with her mantra Qs and malignants, and you can always transition into more of an enchanter role depending on the game state. Karma can act as a great support to supplement your front line and engage champions by providing them with movement speed and big shields. Karma isn't the worst champion to pick if your team doesn't have a tank, as she can pocket her bruises to make them tankier and also use her mantra W to tank more damage. Overall, Karma is a great pick if you want to stay relatively safe and snowball in the early game with an aggressive laning phase. She can pump out huge shields with enchanter builds or insane damage with her damage builds. I wouldn't pick Karma if your team lacks crowd control. I also have a few Karma videos, I'll link them in the description if you want to check them out. Nami. Nami is an aggressive enchantress who looks to pick up early kills and snowball the game. She provides some sustain and has amazing crowd control potential if you are good at hitting your bubbles. Here are some of the things I look for when picking Nami in Champ Select. Number 1. My ADC pairing. Nami works very well with ADCs that deal most of their damage with abilities and don't rely too much on attack speed. Nami adds extra bursts to their abilities and makes them deal more damage while also slowing them with her E. Some examples are Miss Fortune, Caitlyn, and Yasuo. Yasuo also benefits from Nami's Q and R as they provide 2 opportunities for him to ult off of. Now, we all know that Lucian benefits extremely well with Nami, as the duo have an insane kill potential at level 3. They are able to delete enemy health bars with the damage bonuses provided from Lucian's kit when Nami enchants him. Many players fall into the trap of locking this duo for free LP, but I usually find that the strat is very hard to pull off if you aren't experienced playing it. Lucian needs to know his power spikes and chooses his engages correctly, along with Nami needing to hit her bubbles. Moving on, Nami also pairs well with APC mages such as Ziggs and Seraphine, as she makes their abilities slow and adds extra burst. Seraphine also insta-roots with her E, while Nami has her E on top of her. Number 2, does the enemy team have lots of dashes and hard to bubble enemies? Nami needs to be able to land her Q bubbles, otherwise she will be providing too little to the team. If the enemy picks champions such as Yone, Bel'Veth, Yasuo or Katarina, hitting your bubbles can be incredibly hard. Obviously you can combat this by becoming super experienced with how to bubble these champs, but it is better to avoid them if you aren't. Nami is a relatively weak enchanter if you aren't able to land your bubbles consistently. Number 3, does the enemy team have dangerous assassins? I find that Nami is incredibly squishy and immobile. She is very easy to pick off. I try to avoid locking her in if the enemy team has champions like Qiyana, Rengar, Fizz and Akali. There isn't much that Nami can do to escape from these champions even if you build Shurelya's. Zhonya's is now an incredibly expensive item and it's very hard for a support to obtain, especially if you are behind, and it also means that you're delaying your build. Number 4, your team comp. Echoing the point for many enchanters, Nami is one of the squishiest enchanters that needs to stay in the backline due to her lack of mobility. She's one of the worst enchanters to pick if your team doesn't have a frontline or champions with peeling potential. Overall, Nami is a good pick to snowball with strong early game damage dealers against winnable lanes in champ select. I would not advise picking her if your bubbles will be difficult to land or there are too many threats on the enemy team. Soraka. Soraka is the ultimate healing enchantress. She has insane healing output which can be used to keep her carries alive and making them unkillable. Here are some conditions I look for when picking Soraka. Number 1, your ADC and the laning phase. I find that Soraka works incredibly well with ADCs that have a high damage output. This can be either early game snowballers or late game scalers. Some early game snowballers are Tristana and Draven that benefit massively from Soraka's huge heals that allow them to play super aggressively. Soraka Ashe is also a pretty good combo as both champs slow the enemies and Soraka can heal up Ashe while she plays aggressively and takes advantage of the movement speed disparity in the early game. On the flip side, Soraka can be perfect to ensure a safe laning phase for scaling champions such as Jinx, Twitch and Varus, and when these champions hit their power spikes, she can sustain them while they pump out damage. Number 2, dangerous enemy abilities to silence. Soraka's silence is extremely powerful and you should aim to hold it in skirmishes and teamfights with dangerous enemy abilities and engages. However, you should note that Soraka's silence has an extremely long cooldown, so if there are multiple enemies who need their abilities interrupting on the enemy team such as Samira, Katarina and Nunu ultimates, then Soraka maybe isn't the best choice. Number 3, dangerous assassins. Soraka is usually the number 1 target for the enemy team in teamfights as they want to eliminate her before she can provide insane healing to the rest of her team. As discussed for multiple enchanters already, if the enemy picks assassins such as Fizz, Qiyana, Akali and Rengar, Soraka can have an extremely hard time. She did recently receive buffs to her passive movement speed that helps her survive for a little bit longer in fights, but she is still very much a sitting duck against these champions. You will want to play at the back of your team and hopefully get them to peel for you when you inevitably get dove by these assassins. Overall, Soraka is a good pick in champ select if you have lots of damage and you want to keep these characters alive, but you should not pick her if there is no peel or frontline on your team as she is likely to die very quickly. But experienced Sorakas may be able to combat this. Morgana. Morgana has extremely strong groups that she can use to punish enemies that overextend. Morgana isn't an incredibly strong pick in solo queue, but she can definitely be a force to be reckoned with in lower elo if the conditions are correct for her. Here are some conditions I look for when picking Morgana. Number 1, the enemy bot lane. Morgana fares pretty well against engaged and tank supports as she has her E Black Shield that can absorb a crowd control effect when casted on either herself or her ally, rendering any hooks or engage abilities useless if timed correctly. Melee champs or immobile champs such as Nami and Ashe can also be easy targets for a Morgana route. Number 2, your ADC. Morgana works well with ADCs that she can Black Shield as they engage. Some good examples are Draven and Neela. Caitlyn also combos pretty well with Morgana, as Caitlyn can get her trap combo off pretty easily off of a Morgana route. Overall, Morgana doesn't necessarily have to have good synergy with her ADC, as her routes are extremely long, so it is likely that any ADC can capitalize off of her route if you are experienced with her. Overall, Morgana is usually only a strong pick in lower elo games, and her effectiveness usually depends on how experienced you are playing her. I would always consider what champs on your team could really benefit from her E-shield and what CC can be absorbed by it on the other team. Milio. Milio is a super defensive champion. He has 2 charges of his shield, a defensive knockback ability, and an ability that cleanses crowd control and reduces the effectiveness of incoming CC effects afterwards. Here are some of the things I would suggest to look at before locking in Milio in champ select. Number 1. Are there a lot of crowd control effects on the enemy team? Milio's number 1 use in a team fight and at most stages of the game is to cleanse dangerous crowd control effects. Some good examples of these are Ashe Arrow, Sona Ultimate, Amumu Ultimate, and Rammus Taunt. There are many stuns, roots, and fears that Milio can cleanse and save his teammates. Milio can be a big brain counter if picked correctly, as if you cleanse one good ultimate in a team fight and reduce the effects of many other dangerous enemy abilities, you might possibly win the game. Number 2, the enemy bot lane. If the opposing team has a lot of poke damage, then Milio is a good pick to soak up this damage with the 2 charges on his shield. Furthermore, if the enemy support is a mage support and the opposing bot lane lacks sustain, then Milio can take slow trades with his ADC that slowly whistle down the health of the enemy and utilize his passive. Milio's passive applies a burn effect to himself and allies that he shields. This burn damage can stack up in the early games to deal quite a lot of damage, which is often not expected by the enemy. Some examples of these good matchups would be Brand, Zyra, Lux, and Xerath, but only if you are able to dodge their skill shots and slowly poke them down using your shields and your passive damage. Milio's potential threats are hard engaged characters such as Blitzcrank, Maokai, Rel, and Rakan, as he is relatively immobile and can be locked down by champs that have ways of ignoring his Q knockback and simply just getting on top of him before he has the time to cast it. Number 3, your ADC. Milio's W increases the range of your allies' auto attacks, which gives your ADC an amazing poke range and is also extremely useful when chasing enemies that are running away. Kog'Maw is an amazing pair for Milio, as he also has an ability which increases his range, which combines together to create the ultimate harass effect. Milio's shields also give a burst of movement speed, which means he pairs well with Ashe, as this amplifies her movement speed manipulation tactics in the early game with her slowing autos. Milio gives her extra poke and range for her to punish her foes. And finally, Vayne is also an incredibly strong pick for Milio, as she thrives on the extra range and is very slippery with her dashes and invisibility. Milio adds another layer of survivability with his R, meaning that Vayne is pretty much unkillable. Overall, Milio is a good enchanter to pick when you want to have a safe lane and play very passively. He is good to pick where there is a lot of CC to cleanse with his ultimate, and experienced Milios can use his Q to stop enemy engage abilities. But again, Milio isn't the best pick when you don't have a tank, and he is easily rendered useless if you don't know how to use your abilities very well. Renata. Renata is a special support champion. She has unique mechanics that have not been seen on any other characters. She is able to manipulate HP with her W and revive allies if they eliminate an enemy in its duration, and her ultimate makes enemies berserk and attack each other. Here are some of the things I look for when locking in Renata. Number 1, the enemy team. I look to pick Renata when the enemy team has multiple auto attackers. Some good examples are Senna support with any ADC, or characters like Kindred, Quinn, or Tristana in other roles. Renata's ult is the most effective with ranged attackers, as it is a lot easier for them to damage their teammates, but her ult is also extremely effective in close quarters against high damage melee characters like Yone, Viego, and Yasuo. But make sure you watch out for Yasuo's wind wall. As for the enemy support, Renata finds matchups harder against characters that can poke her out and out-sustain her. I tend to have more successes against melee supports that I can pull out of position and kill, such as Nautilus and Alistar. Number 2, your ADC. Renata works well with aggressive ADCs that want to perma-fight. Some good examples are Draven, Samira, and Neela. These champions can utilize the extra health that Renata provides with her W to pick off more enemies and revive themselves. Samira and Neela because they are melee champs and die extremely fast but are also extremely dangerous, and Draven because Draven players. Overall, Renata isn't a strong blind pick. I would only recommend picking her when the enemy team has good candidates to berserk and she has an aggressive ADC with a high damage output. Senna. Senna is a marksman support character who scales infinitely by collecting souls throughout the game, which increases her damage, attack range, and critical strike chance. She's a force to be reckoned with. Here are some of the things to look for when picking Senna in Champ Select. Number 1. The enemy bot lane. Senna is immobile and has an extremely low health pool, especially in the early stages of the game that enemies can look to punish. As a result, this means that Senna is bad against aggressive engagers that can lock her down, such as Pyke, Camille, Pantheon, and Leona. Senna's aim is to gradually poke in lane and keep her ADC healthy with her Q. Senna fares well against enchanters such as Karma, Nami, and Sona, as she has higher sustainability and poke damage in the early game. Enchanters are also immobile, so Senna can look to pick up some early kills after landing a W. Another character that is particularly bad against Senna is Braum. This is because Braum's passive relies on auto-attacking, but Senna can activate her Mist, which dramatically decreases the enemy's range of hitting her and her ally. However, Senna is a skillful character as her effectiveness relies on how good you are at spacing with your auto-attacks and hitting your roots. A good Senna can bait out engaged abilities with her auto-spacing and her extra movement speed from her passive. Number 2. Your ADC. I will talk about a few ADCs I think have great synergy with Senna. Ashe. Ashe has insane slowing effects built into her kit, which synergize well with Senna's slow, root, and E movement speed boost. This makes for the ultimate chase down duo, and you will easily find yourself picking up kills if the enemy flops and engage on you. There is no way they are running away. Oh, and don't forget the double global ultimate, Seraphine. Seraphine can instantly root targets with her E once the target is slowed by Senna's Q. Senna can use her Q off of towers, wards, and most importantly minions, which means the duo can have great engage potential in the midst of minion waves. They also have insane sustain. Jhin. As previously mentioned, Senna has a long range on her Q which Jhin can utilize to root enemies and pick up some easy kills. More generally, Senna works really well with poking ADCs. Number 3. Your team comp. Senna looks to scale to the late game where she gains ridiculous attack range, which is very hard to play against, so it is good if your team has some other characters that thrive in the late game, as your whole team will be playing to reach it. She also needs a frontline and characters that will peel for her since she is immobile and has a very small health pool. Enemy assassins will usually focus her first. Senna is also a good pick for support if your team has lots of ability power or if your team is lacking damage. Overall, Senna is a great pick in solo queue to carry your games with. Recently, she has been very strong in ADC, but it is likely she will be nerfed to bring her back to more of a supportive role. She's the perfect pick to round off a tanky team. Now let's move on to Yuumi.
Fishy, fishy, fish. Where's my fishy
More of a
fish?
dog
Where's
person.
my
Fishy,
Overall, enchanters are usually not a very strong blind pick. This is because they are easily counterpicked by hook and engage champs, but there are ways to combat this. If you're faced with a strong hook character like Blitzcrank, Nautilus, or Pyke, make sure you are playing behind your minions so that there is no chance you will be hooked. You should also try and play as passive as possible and allow the enemies to push up to your tower. This would be a perfect time for your jungler to gank your lane and put you ahead so that you have a better chance of fighting them later on. My personal advice, if you have to blind pick an enchanter, is to opt for Janna or Karma, as they are both pretty well-rounded characters and give you scope to play either aggressively or defensively. But anyways, I hope this video has provided you with some helpful information and insight into how I decide which enchanters to pick in Champ Select. Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to leave a like and consider subscribing if you enjoyed. Memberships are also live on my channel now. You will find the join button right next to the subscribe button. I also stream on Twitch where I mainly play League of Legends, so come along and chat to me. You can also join my Discord server if you want to chat with my community. All the links you need are in the description. I'll see you guys soon.